And it looks like we are live. So, first hour time going live, so all the mistakes I make they're just there for everyone. I am super excited to have my next guest. He has been very gracious to come on do my first live stream with me day before Easter. This has been branded as an Easter special. If you haven't seen his YouTube channel, which, let's be honest, you're probably here because of his YouTube channel, but on the off chance you're new to it, What Do You Meme? The Twitter is also What Do You Meme? Jon McCray, thank you so much for being here, sir.
Yeah, man. Good to be here, bro. What's up, party people? Everybody else out there?
Yeah, hopefully. I have not quite figured out how to look at the YouTube analytics yet to see the live chat or anything. So we'll try to get that going as we're talking.
Yep.
Probably, I guess, for our first question, I'll ask you is, how did you come to faith? Was it one of those things you were raised in it, or it was introduced to you later on?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a weird story, but not too weird. It's just not as linear as it seems for a lot of people. But basically, we didn't grow up in a church going home or anything like that. We never went to church or had conversations about God or anything like that. But my mom and dad would kind of say things about God, but my dad wasn't around too much, so it's kind of a weird story. But anyways, we were first introduced to, when I say we, I'm thinking me and my twin brother, by the way. We were first introduced to the faith when we were 15, and we went to this church, and the church was really is super, super charismatic. And so we had like some really weird experiences there. Like it was really kind of culty like, and I wouldn't think that I wouldn't consider it even really a Christian church because they didn't really focus on any of the foundations or even discuss them. But we both had like weird experiences there and stuff. And long story short, when we decided to leave the church, they said that we were going to be cursed if we left. And so it was really kind of a negative experience. And so after that, me and my brother both, I think, were kind of like agnostic and stuff a lot all over the place. And I remember for me personally, like I would wrestle a lot internally. Like some days I'd be like, we're for, there's a God for sure. I mean, look around at all this creation and stuff like that. And other days I'm like, dude, we're for sure all alone in this like big, vast, universe, And so it was kind of like a lot of wrestling back and forth until college. When I went to college, I took a philosophy of religion class by mistake because the world religion class was all full. I didn't know what philosophy was, but I was like, yeah, I guess I'll just try it. If I don't like it, I'll drop out. And so I took it, and then I came across like all these arguments, and I just was like blown away. Like the one that stuck for me the most was the Kalam. The Kalam cosmological argument was the one that was, to me, the most persuasive. Like I was like, this shows God, and I don't have to like presuppose God in advance. It just like deductively proves God. And so I remember at some point after that class, I said to myself, I was like, I believe in God now, because that was for me like where the intellect and everything else just kind of went together, where I was like, I believe in God now, And so, so with that, like, after that point, like I started kind of looking more into like what I know now as apologetics. I didn't know what apologetics really was, but I started going to like a lot of different churches and stuff too. And I would read on the churches before I went to kind of get an idea of what they believed and stuff. And so when I did that, I kept coming across like different, information on things like the resurrection and all that sort of thing too. But I remember thinking when I went to all those churches, I was like, all of the people in all of these churches, when I asked them why their religion and not others, they all gave me similar responses. And most of them said something along the lines of, because I prayed and this happened, or, we were born into this church or something like that, or I just know I can feel it in my spirit or whatever, and that was really upsetting for me because I said, all these people have vastly different beliefs. So either God, like, literally, just, talks to everybody in all these different ways that seem to be contradictory, or there's some stronger like foundation to see like how we can separate these one belief system from the others. And so long story short, after a while, I came across like a lot of evidence for the resurrection, Christianity and all that. And I started debating it a lot online. And for me, I debated it for a few years, but for me, a lot of it was trying to establish in my head exactly what I believed. So I would always argue for Christianity, but I would be doing it sometimes to test these beliefs, to hear the responses and then consider them and then see what it was that I actually believed, So, yeah, so long story short, I'd say that like I kind of waffled a lot, but I think I came there was a point where I hit where I was like, okay, this makes sense to me, and it's authentic to me. Like it's I can say without feeling like I'm deceiving myself or lying to myself that I believe this, and then having the community and and all that other stuff too. It all kind of came together. So, anyways, that's where I realized I hit a point where I internalized the gospel. I want to say where I didn't just understand it; I fully internalized it. That was a point somewhere around like before I got married, and that kind of went hand in hand, which helped me understand marriage and stuff too, understanding the gospel and also. Anyways, lots of kind of things that led, but that's the gist.
Yeah, so the college class was the professor a theist or a Christian?
Yeah, he actually was a Christian, and I didn't find out until after the class because I talked to him after the class because I like really enjoyed the class. But he was really good at balancing it where you couldn't tell. You know what I mean? Like he would argue a lot for the position and a lot against the position, and always kind of kept it neutral. So he did really well. But what was so cool about the class was for the final, and I went and took the class again, by the way. But for the final, I remember we had a hat that you draw your position that you're going to be arguing out of or whatever. And so like I drew arguing against the resurrection too. And this is the second time I took the class. And then I remember I was thinking through these facts and stuff like this and saying, what is the best explanation of this stuff where I'm not being ad hoc or sound like I'm cheating? You know what I mean? And I remember just like rambling and I was like, I can figure something out. You know what I mean? I remember around my head and I was like, I really can't think of a really good argument, you know what I mean, against the facts of the resurrection. So that's why it was, it was a pretty cool class too. But yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's one of the things I do. I always try to play devil's advocate against my own ideas. And I'm not interested in the straw man versions. I'm not interested in the easy arguments. I'm interested in trying to find the best argument. I even try to think of stronger arguments than atheists think of against my beliefs. And I think I have a decent argument against things like the Kalam, the design argument. Morality is a lot tougher. But you're right, the resurrection, it's kind of one of the hardest ones to think of a good counter argument to, because it's different if you're in the atheist shoes and you think the Gospels were written hundreds of years later. But for us, and we've looked at the evidence, we're convinced that they were written early. We're trying to come up with a counter argument to how can they be written early and still be wrong. Right. And so I think that's a lot harder.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing I think for people when it comes to the evidence for the resurrection is that they don't understand the context of, or maybe context isn't the right word, but if you don't understand why the evidence is good for the resurrection, which most people won't because they're thinking about it in terms of like modern historical evidence or something like that. They don't understand the standards that make something qualify for good historical evidence. And so the evidence sounds bad on the surface if you're not familiar with ancient history and then how it goes, So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, I think, when trying to present the resurrection argument to people in a way that they can understand without having any knowledge of how ancient history works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I like I completely forgot what I was going to say. Yeah. So I was thinking of the debate Matt Dillahunty just had with Mike Winger. Oh, well, yeah. Why don't we talk about that a little bit? You and Mike Winger and Cameron Bertuzzi from Capturing Christianity just did a response video to 20 arguments against Christianity. If I'm not mistaken, that video is relatively old. I think I saw it a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think it is. And it was Cameron's idea, I think, initially. And I think Cameron asked Mike if he would do it. And then I don't know how I got pulled into it, but they asked me. And so I was like, okay, I'll do it. And then so I had ideas for how I wanted to structure it and stuff. So I was like, why don't we just do this, and then we'll do each respond to a different one and then make them little short videos and, and then put them all on a playlist. So that's the only part where I kind of kicked in, but it was Cameron's kind of idea. And I think the video is older from what I understand, but yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I think what you guys did that was brilliant was you broke it down and isolated each argument by itself and just said why, even if it were to succeed, it doesn't prove what it attempts to prove. I think best case scenario for him is he could claim it was kind of a cumulative case, all 20 arguments going together. But then when you actually break it down and look at each one individually, it just wasn't going anywhere.
Right. Yeah. No, that's how I typically try to argue. Um, a lot of the times in my positions is, and I did this in my series of Cosmic Skeptic that I'm doing right now too. Like, I always try to take like the worst case scenario and then argue from that. So like, even if people like, even if I'm wrong about these facts in this kind of way, what follows from that? Because a lot of times people, if they hear something, they don't they don't know how to like think about, because they're kind of so guarded that they don't even consider like, okay, if he's right, then what falls apart from that? You know what I mean? Just like, for example, the argument like, oh, if you weren't born in America, you wouldn't be Christian. Okay, if you're right, then what follows from that? Does it follow that Christianity's false? Well, of course not. You know what I mean? So that's typically how I think anyway. So I try to take how I think and then try to put it into videos. If that makes sense.
Yeah. What do you make of that? The fact that these aren't just like, okay, maybe in the case of that video, it was kind of old, but in general, whether I'm on social media, on YouTube, Facebook, new stuff I'm seeing, it's the same arguments from the other side, like the genetic fallacy. What do you make of that? That it's like, we look on the apologist side, like William Lane Craig, how arguments are developing and getting better, but it seems their arguments are just kind of staying the same. They keep, rehashing the same old terrible arguments.
Yeah. In my view, and this is my view, the arguments. Okay, so I guess the arguments for atheism, and people change, I mean, they go back and forth on how to define atheism and that sort of thing too. But if you're arguing the position that God does not exist, those arguments aren't typically that good. And so I think by and large they're not. But they're taken more seriously in academia. There's some philosophers or some atheist philosophers and stuff that pump forth like much better arguments. But when you get into the popular level stuff, it's just almost all rhetoric or emotionally charged slogans. And why I think it kind of works for people is because they're arguing in ways that already resonate with how some people feel who had bad upbringings in Christianity or with Christians or religious people or something like that too. And as a Christian too, I do believe that there's some sort of spiritual dimension sometimes too, because it makes sense to me. So, but anyways, like, yeah, so I think that because of the fact that it's just mainly emotional rhetoric, like those kind of arguments are kind of stick around, because if you had to take away the emotional rhetoric, I just think online atheism would almost, disappear, because I can't think of very many things that atheists make videos on that do well that have to do with logic rather than just emotion, So, and that's not necessarily to say that what they're doing is, completely wrong or anything like that. It's just kind of how the facts of the matter is, the way that I understand it. And so that's my view on it, is that a lot of it is they don't necessarily care about being sophisticated. The online kind of groups don't as much. They don't care about being sophisticated and understanding the philosophy. And there's a YouTuber, I've only watched a few of his videos. He's an agnostic, but a lot of people would say he's an atheist given their definition. But his name is Steve McCray, I think, and he's with a Non Sequitur show. But I've watched a few of his videos, and I was like, I felt bad for him because he struggles in the same way to articulate to atheists what I feel like I struggle with. When you're trying to explain to them the logic behind it and like the philosophy, the structure, the epistemology, those sort of things, and they just like hand wave it away. But because he goes against popular opinion of atheists, then, a lot of the atheists online, they do the same thing to him. And so it's really weird and kind of awkward, So, but I've only watched a few of the guy's videos, but I like the guy so far from what I've seen. So, yeah. Anyways,
that off topic, that reminds me of a video. Since we were discussing the resurrection earlier, anyway, there's a video, and it's actually just audio, but you can still find it on YouTube. And it's Bart Ehrman. He's through a phone call on a radio show, and they're saying, well, if Jesus even existed, or if Paul even said that, and Bart Ehrman's like, no, every scholar accepts that Jesus existed, and that Paul wrote, I think it was 1 Corinthians he was talking about, and there's like, you can tell they're so caught off guard. They thought because they had a fellow atheist on that he would just kind of go with, well, maybe Jesus never existed, and he scolded them for it.
Yeah, and I've seen the online atheists and stuff like just like so like Bart Ehrman's dishonest. He's this, he's stupid, and I'm just like, anybody who possibly could disagree with you, if you just call them all stupid, like that's just, and they call everybody dishonest. And I blame that on Richard Carrier and some others like him. I think Richard Carrier calls every single critic of his dishonest. Bart Ehrman criticized him. He's dishonest. I was like, you call everybody dishonest. And a lot of online atheists go follow the same vein. They're very tribalistic like that too. Like everybody, if you disagree with someone, you're dishonest. But in fairness to the atheists, I think my kind of way of thinking about it, which is possible, is that because they feel like they were led astray by Christians in the past, because they feel like Christianity was false and their parents and everybody lied to them, then maybe that's why they consider Christians by and large dishonest. You know what I mean? Because they think that everybody's being intentionally dishonest, because yeah, I just get a lot of comments and it just blows my mind because they're like, oh, you're just trying to be dishonest. And I'm like, no, you just didn't understand the argument most of the time too, And I'm like, why assume everybody's just dishonest? It's just, I don't think that way, but a lot of people online do on all sides of the group too, and the Muslims debates, the Christians and everybody. I see that a lot, but you never hear me call people dishonest because I'm very slow for the most part to call somebody dishonest.
Yeah, that reminds me of a conversation I had with a friend of a friend. It was a couple years ago. And my friends kept telling me about him because we hadn't met before, and they're saying he's an atheist. And they kept saying, "You got to talk to him. We got to get you two together so you can talk to him." And so, I kept preparing for the first time I met him to make sure my arguments were on point and everything. And when we finally got together and we all talked, I was kind of going with the kalam and the design argument and the moral argument. And he kept agreeing with me. He's like, yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I said, yeah, that proves a theistic God. And then when you get to the evidence for Jesus, and I went through that a little bit, I said, that shows you it's the Christian God. And he kept saying like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And so I was struck. It was almost like he was agreeing with me that the evidence for Christianity was good. And so I stopped for a minute and I went to that question Dr. Frank Turk always talks about. I said, well, let me ask you this. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And he kind of thought for a minute. He's like, no, I wouldn't. And I was like, why? And he's like, well, I was in my upbringing, my parents, they just kind of forced it down my throat. The church I felt was very dishonest. He's like, so I'm just so turned off from it that I just don't want anything to do about it. And I think that's probably a lot more people than we realize. They just are covering it up with these arguments.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I understand that too because I had a church experience that would have thrown me off, and so I can sympathize with that too with a lot of people. But I do agree that by and large, I don't believe that the majority of atheists that are rejecting the existence of God does so on rational grounds alone. And I think people try to say that that's it, but I think a lot more goes into belief and non-belief than we even are consciously aware of, and so that cuts both ways, and I'm okay with that. But what I want to say is that I noticed when I was doing a lot of debates, and me and Cameron would do a lot of online debates together. Cameron Bertuzzi from Caption Christianity. We would go be doing a bunch of online debates all the time. And what I noticed is that atheists who would pride themselves on being logical, following logic, and that's why they reject Christianity and science and all this stuff. They're the same ones that would throw out all of those in a minute. They throw out the science of the fine tuning and be like, oh, well, that's just not true. You get, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, these are scientific facts that you're disagreeing with, no matter the evidence, just to maintain your position. So who's the one that's being irrational here? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's typically what I found. I thought about in the past doing a video called Atheists Hate Science, because I wanted to show how whenever the science goes against their worldview, they're so quick to throw it out. You know what I mean? And that's what they accuse Christians of doing. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what I've kind of come to see. And what I realized, even with the video that we responded to with Hemet Mehta, if that's how you say his name, when me and Cameron and Mike did the series on that. I mean, if you listen to those arguments, they're not logical. None of them logically lead to the conclusion, therefore God doesn't exist. I think the only one that kind of attempts to is to say there's no evidence for God, but outside of that, none of them are logical arguments, but they're persuasive to a lot of people. And they're persuasive to the atheists on an emotional level, not a logical level. So what I realize is if if a lot of these atheists don't accept or reject views based on the evidence, they don't change their beliefs based on the evidence, just like the mythicists and stuff like this a lot, you know. And that could just be bad epistemology for mythicists. But if they're not changing their view, then the reason why they hold their view is not because of the facts and evidence. There's more to it. And you know, and I think like Tim Keller says how everybody has intellectual reasons for their position, emotional reasons, social reasons, you know, personal reasons, and all these go into it. And people always try to reduce them down to just one, but really there's always more at play.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that. One of the things that baffles me so much about like the genetic fallacy is it completely ignores the complexity of what shapes and molds people's personal beliefs. It's not that I just happen to be raised in a certain culture that has a dominant belief, or I happen to be raised in a family that has a belief. You know, you have, and maybe as a child, you know, you can look at that and say, okay, whatever they're taught is true. But as you get older, you know, you learn more, you get intellectual reasons, you get emotional reasons, you get subconscious reasons that you're not even thinking about. It just completely ignores the complexity of what goes into people's belief. Even people who are born, you know, in the Middle East, who are raised in Islam, and that's very much more heavily indoctrinated than Christianity is in the West. Even they'll turn out to be either Christians or atheists. They'll move away from it. So even in places where you're heavily indoctrinated, you can still change your mind. So it's so complex. And of course, the thing with the genetic fallacy is all you have to do is broaden the scope a little bit, and you realize that applies to atheism as well. If you were raised, I could say, well, of course you're an atheist. You were raised by parents who taught you that. It's just, it doesn't go anywhere.
Well, and the thing is, if they feel like they, you know, wherever they say they're born, so like in America, they say that they'd have to be born Christian. If they were able to think their way out of it, out of Christianity, then why is it that other Christians aren't able to do it? You know what I mean? And that's the kind of thing I think I'm like, you know, they can be like, well, I thought about my position, so I know I hold my position. But I mean, I'm saying the same thing. Yes, I thought about my position too. You know what I mean? And I know why I hold my position, you know? And so it's just, I understand why it looks suspicious, you know what I mean? Because you're like, and it makes sense. A lot of people do inherit their religious beliefs from their parents and don't think about them much. But that doesn't mean that everybody that holds that position does so on the basis of only it coming from their parents. You know what I mean? There's a lot more that kind of goes into it there. And people go to college, they're free to reject it, you know what I mean? And all this too. I think in Islam it's harder, like you said, because it's really intertwined with the family in a different way than Christianity typically is in the West and in households. But yeah, people are free to think, you know, so if they think that they're free to think out of it, then other people can. And if they didn't believe that, then they have no reason to try to evangelize people out of their religion.
Yeah, that's correct. Another thing I want, because since today's kind of our Easter special, we'll kind of keep coming back to the resurrection. So one thing I'm currently working on was a certain Jew who will remain unnamed. He doesn't talk about it often, but there's a few clips of him on YouTube talking about why he doesn't accept Jesus as the Messiah. And so I decided I wanted to do a video responding to these claims, and it's actually gotten a lot more complex than I had anticipated. It's going to be like 3 parts now. The first part is going to focus kind of on the Old Testament. And so what I've been turning primarily to is a debate that Nabil Qureshi had with Shabir Ali. And I didn't even realize this till I was done writing the video. I think the Trinity, the doctrine of the Trinity, plays a much bigger role than I had anticipated. I kind of got to go back and rewrite it. But you know, as I'm thinking about Nabil Qureshi, I just started thinking about it because, you know, we were talking about Islam and then moving out. And so Nabil Qureshi, he was good friends with David Wood, who's a good friend of yours. How did you meet David Wood? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I think right around the time I started my channel, I never really knew who he was. I did read Nabil's book at some point, and I can't remember if that was before or after. I think that was before I met Wood, and I remember him talking about Wood and stuff in there. And then at EPS apologetics conference, I met him. Gosh, I think that was in Atlanta, so maybe 3 years ago or something. I'm so bad at chronology, but at some point I met him, and I just talked to him a little bit because I had a good Muslim friend who I was talking to a lot too, and I was kind of and this guy's really smart, and he's got a position I think that's a lot more coherent than most Muslims. And so and he's friends with a lot of us Christians who used to like debate and stuff a lot online and stuff. So anyways, good guy. But anyways, so I was running by some of his objections with Wood, and I talked to him, and then after the conference, I remember talking to Wood. I was seeing if he wanted to do a video for my channel, and he said he would. And he took like forever as usual, which is Wood. I think he took like 6 months or something ridiculous. And then one day he just like, hey, I'm recording the video now. I'm like, whoa, you know. Then he sent it, and I was like, oh, this is awesome, you know. Because I became a fan of his channel at that point. I started watching all of his videos after I met him, I remember, and so I became a fan of his channel. But anyways, then he hit me back, and he's like, yeah, he's like, tell me about his idea he had for Islamicize me, and he's like, dude, he's like, we can do something awesome, you know. He's like, and I knew one other guy too, because he said he was planning on doing Islamicize me with Nabil. So he's like, yeah. So he's like, how about you just do it with me? And then I know another guy that's pretty funny too, and he might be good for it too. And then that was Vocab. And so then we all started talking and stuff like that. And then we started recording and just being friends and flying out all the time to meet each other and stuff like that. So that's kind of how it all kicked off.
Yeah, I really like that series. What would you say was the goal behind the Islamicize Me series?
Yeah, so, and this is something we talked a lot about too, me, Wood, and Vocab too. But basically, and Wood has an unconventional approach to apologetics, right, for evangelizing Muslims. And he told me too, he's learned this by talking with Nabil. He said he found that, like, he watched a debate with Nabil with a Muslim and William Lane Craig, and he said it was like hands down, Craig just completely demolished the guy, right? But afterwards, he asked Nabil, he's like, yeah, so what did you think? And Nabil's like, oh, I think the other guy won. And then he's like, what? You know what I mean? And then he started pressing Nabil on the reasons why, and it kind of came down to their culture and the tone and the aggression and stuff like this, because they think that, like, if you can say something with this much confidence, you must really believe it. And they see that as more of a threat. And so he said he started kind of trying this stuff out with other Muslims and stuff like this. And he said as soon as he switched his approach, you know, instead of just trying to be the nice guy all the time, to his approach now, he said he started getting stacks and stacks of conversions. People telling him they've converted, you know, that he had on his desk or whatever. And so he came to learn that, like, for some Muslims, the best approach is not to be like super nice because they respect power and authority, you know. And so that was kind of the backdrop to what it was too. But the approach, what we wanted to do was take a lot of the teachings, that a lot of the things that people don't know about Muhammad and the teachings and stuff like that, that's hidden in the traditions and into the hadiths and the Islamic literature, and also in like the biographies of Muhammad and stuff like that. It's not really public knowledge as much, and this has to do with the imams and stuff that are usually giving the people the information and stuff like this. But now, since we have the internet, everybody can go see. But basically, trying to bring that stuff out in a way that makes people have to care and think about it, you know? And so, like, showing kind of like some of the disgusting stuff is kind of similar to when some Christians try to show like pictures of like, and this is awful, but I mean, I'm not saying the approach is awful, but it's awful, but look, pictures of like aborted babies. If it gets in an emotional, if people can see it, then they can start to internalize it, and it's harder to just hand wave away. So that was kind of like one of the ideas behind Islamicize Me, but Wood had this in his mind for years, you know, the kind of basic stuff. So when we went to go shoot it, he would kind of tell us the concepts and stuff a lot. He wrote some of the scripts, I wrote some of the scripts, and Vocab wrote some of the scripts. And then, yeah, we did it all in a few days. So.
Yeah. I really like Nabil Qureshi. He was a brilliant guy. It was really sad when he passed.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know him. And
yeah.
I just felt devastated. I felt because you feel like you know somebody, you know, and especially when you read his book and how emotional it was.
Nabil was special, man. Yeah, he was special, and him through his videos too. You felt like you got to know him really well. You know what I mean? Because he was just watching his videos and his journey of the last year of his life and stuff like that too. Really makes you feel like you knew him well. And yeah, so it was a sad loss. It was Nabil.
Yeah, it's funny that I've ended up using his video because he was debating Shabir Ali, right? and they're debating on, is God completely one, or is he a Trinity? And it's just funny to me that Nabil's approach for proving he was a Trinity, he was like, well, I'm going to go right to the Old Testament. Like he does go into the New Testament in the debate, but his primary focus is like, well, let's look at the Old Testament. God is clearly a Trinity. And that's not even responding to Judaism. So I found it very useful in responding to Judaism.
Oh yeah, and Sam Shamoon, by the way, when I saw him, I think during when we were recording this Islamicize Me series, and the guy that played the doctor, I can't remember his name now. Sorry, the guy that played the doctor in the Islamicize Me series, he does a lot of Jewish stuff too, and I think he's at Biola, or I can't remember, one of those colleges. But anyways, he does a lot too, and so I was talking with them a lot about the Trinity in the Old Testament, and it was really interesting. And the thing about Sam Shamoon too is he has one of those photographic memories where he can remember like what the page looks like, and he starts reading off the scriptures and stuff in his mind, and it's like ridiculously bizarre. But it was really cool, like talking with all of them about like the Trinity in the Old Testament. There's really some really cool arguments in there.
Yeah, it's funny. So I was working all day yesterday writing out this video, and by the time I got to the end of it, something just hit me about the Trinity, and so now I'm going to focus a lot more on that. It made me realize because one of the things Jews say is, one of the core beliefs of Judaism is that God, I forget the word now, but it means he can't incarnate, right? He can't manifest himself physically in the world. And if you look at the debate with Nabil, one thing he's talking about is that the early Jews, even the Jews at the time of Jesus, believed that God was at least binitarian, meaning that he was two in person, right? Because you had all these times in the Old Testament of God incarnating in the world, but it also seemed like that there was two gods when that was happening. So like when he appears to Abraham, it says he appeared as a man to Abraham, and then a few verses later it says Yahweh rained fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah from Yahweh in heaven. And so now you look at how the Jews have revised their theology so that God is only one in person and that he can incarnate. It seems that they have to go back into the Old Testament and reinterpret those verses. And now it can't allow for Jesus to be part of God and incarnate in the world.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's interesting. And something similar too happens with Isaiah 53. Like, the early rabbis and stuff didn't interpret Isaiah 53 to be Israel, you know what I mean? But a lot of the modern Jews and stuff will interpret it. They're saying, oh yeah, this is talking about Israel, you know what I mean? But this didn't come out for a long time. I can't remember how many hundreds of years after. But anyways, yeah, so I thought it was, that was another thing that was really interesting too.
Yeah, because one thing Nabil talks about is if you look at the early commentary from Jews on the Old Testament was when God would manifest as a man in the world, they replaced that with the Logos, right? So they had an idea of the Logos. They didn't know it was Jesus, right? Because Jesus didn't come yet. And I feel like if you look at a lot of the Old Testament verses that talk about the Messiah, it seems to be talking about Jesus' second coming, right? So it makes sense that the early Jews had their expectations of the Messiah to, bring peace to Israel and do all these things because they're focusing on it looking like his second coming. But then he comes and he dies and they're not expecting that. And now in order to refute early Christianity, they have to reform their theology. And so now, like I said before, in order to refute early Christianity, they wanted to say, well, look, God isn't binitarian. He's absolutely one. And so he can't incarnate in the world because that would lead to different contradictions and stuff. And so, often they'll accuse Christians of it's a late Christian invention that the Messiah was someone who comes and dies for the sins of the world, when really it seems to be late Jewish inventions that they revised what the Messiah was.
Yeah, interesting too. Yeah, and I was thinking about this the other day, just thinking through a lot of the Old Testament and some of these things and stuff that all happen, and how Jesus like fulfills all of these different things, and everything just goes together. That's what's so crazy about it is when Jesus says, all the scriptures are about him. I mean, like truer words couldn't be spoken. You know what I mean? Because like just all of these things that even happened in Israel's past and stuff like this all come together to make sense for Jesus. So I think it's just like super. There's a lot of layers to the Bible too. Just super interesting stuff.
Yeah, I always think it's funny, you know, when Jews will kind of criticize Jesus, they'll say, well, he didn't teach anything that was super new. He kind of really, there was either restatements of the Old Testament or he built on the Old Testament a little bit. And I'm thinking like, yes, yes, exactly. That's all. We took all that with us. The New Testament, we took the Old Testament with us. That's all one religion. That's our argument, is that it's not Old Testament, New Testament. It's not these two drastically different religions. I think it's often seen as, you know, there was Judaism and then here comes Christianity and it's this new thing and it breaks off. And what I really think is happening is Judaism is building and it keeps building into Christianity, but the Jews have different expectations, so they're the ones who kind of break off, right?
Yeah.
But because all the way at the bottom it's still Judaism, it seems like Christianity was the new thing, when I really think it's Judaism that kind of broke off and became its own new thing.
Oh, I completely agree. Yeah, I agree with that entirely.
Yeah. It's funny because you were talking about earlier philosophy classes in college. I remember the first two philosophy classes. I took them both in the same semester. One was a kind of a general philosophy class, and that professor, he was a theist, right? And so me and him talked about that kind of stuff all the time. And my other class was it was moral philosophy, and he was an atheist. And man, him and we got into it. And I'm actually ashamed because that was before I knew as much about apologetics. So he kind of beat me up in front of the class a few times, but we got along really well. I got an A in the class. He really liked me, you know, because as long as I was arguing for my position, he was happy about it.
That's cool, man. I always think like, what it'd be like if I went back to like a philosophy of religion class now and just you know, an introduction class, and like I always think it would be fun, you know what I mean? And I'll be like, you know, if the professor was like an atheist who was trying to pull one over on the students, I would just roll them. But he's probably a guy that's, you know, arguing with me on my channel or something. But
yeah, I always think it'd be fun if I could somehow reach out to them and maybe get them to come to my channel now.
Oh yeah.
Now looking back, I realized that what had happened, especially in that class, was he started off building all these premises in like the beginning of the class that it seemed like we should all agree on. And then so by the time we're up here and I start arguing with him, I've already agreed to these premises that were actually wrong. And so he was beating me up here. And
that's good debating then.
Yeah.
If you're building off of premises that people already agree with and then they don't even realize where the conclusion leads, then I think you set up a good argument.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't fall for that as much now. I was like just getting into apologetics at that point.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
So you guys who are watching live, if you want to start putting questions in the comments. Also, if you're here, subscribe. If you're not already, I would really, really appreciate that. If you want to start doing questions in the comments.
Awesome. Yeah. 103 subscribers. Let's see if. And what do we have? So let's see if we can get them to 110 subscribers. If you guys haven't subscribed, subscribe.
I'm only a small percentage. I'm behind in the race.
Yeah, you guys have any questions or whatever, send them in and we will chat about them. So
one thing I did want to ask you, because years ago when I decided to start my channel, I actually didn't want to go into the area of apologetics. I was more interested in like comedy and entertainment. And I was actually inspired by Steven Crowder. I was like, oh, well, here he's merging kind of politics and comedy. Maybe I could do that with apologetics. Now, I haven't done nearly as much of that on my channel as I would have liked to. It's mainly my one video I did on Christmas a couple years ago. But so you've actually been a role model for me, how you've incorporated comedy and apologetics. What inspired you to do that?
Oh, good, man. No, that's awesome. I don't know, man. For me, I always wanted to create a channel that I wanted to watch. Like, okay, so how I started my YouTube channel was also kind of like a side thing. Like I had zero intentions on starting a YouTube channel. And the guy was trying to encourage me. He's like, dude, people like you or whatever. He's like, start a YouTube channel. I was like, nah, I was like, I don't have a camera and stuff. This guy lives in Australia, but he's a Christian guy too. And we talked a lot online. I created a group a long time ago with a lot of the apologists for like debating and stuff like that, where it's like a support group for Christian debaters online. But anyways, he just like flat out just sent me like a whole camera setup. You know, he sent me like, you know, my first camera, wherever it is over here, and then and has like all this little stuff. And so I said, well, now I feel like I have to record. So I was like, so I guess I'll start, and then at that point I wanted to just do something that I wanted to watch, so that was basically kind of my thing. I was like, and I like the academic stuff and all that too, but I was like, sometimes I'm like, oh, it's kind of, it's just too academic and dry. So I want to try do something else to kind of bring something new to the field, So that's really just why I started, and I just went with it. I've been doing it now for about a year and a few months, I think. About a year and 3 months or something like that. And and it's going well, and I enjoy it. So just hard to get enough time to do everything I want to do, but it's fun.
We have a question. This is JMD Apologetics. Oh, he says, did Jon see my devil's advocate with inspiring philosophy? I role-played a meme atheist.
Jay, don't nobody want to see your video full? No, I'm just kidding. No, what up, man? I know JMD. I was okay. I did an interview on his channel before, and we did me, him, and Inspiring Philosophy did a debate review. Anyways, no, man, I haven't seen it. But yeah, I hope it's awesome. I didn't even see it pop up, so I don't know nothing about it. Sorry, man.
Fair enough. One thing I wanted to ask you, or maybe just kind of mention, we can talk about a little bit. What's happening with the technological revolution is really interesting. So apologetics, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to incorporate comedy, was to kind of bridge the divide between, you kind of get more intellectual as you get older, and then you kind of want to be entertained more, when you're in your 20s and 30s. So I thought merging comedy and apologetics could kind of bridge that gap. And one thing I think that's been really useful to guys like you and Cameron and myself is the technological revolution has allowed for now you don't have to go and get your PhD and write books to, be popular as an apologist. You can just put material out there on YouTube, and if people like it, if it's of quality, people watch it, and you can get popular that way. I found that very useful for myself.
I completely agree with that too, because like a lot of people will be like, oh, I'm going to go get my PhD in apologetics or whatever, or get a degree in apologetics or whatever. And that, if you want to take that route, that's fine. But if you think you need it to reach people, I don't think that's right. The education part is good though, but if you think you need it to reach people, then I don't think that's true today like it used to be. I think people used to only respect people with PhDs. Now people listen more to people like, Kim Kardashian and Kanye West than they will someone like William McCray, right? So that's just the way that the culture has kind of changed and shifted. And so I think it's a good time for just people that are just like apologetic nerds like me that just like to read the stuff, good time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and again, I have nothing wrong with going and getting a PhD. There was one time when I thought that was going to be my goal, was to go and get a PhD in this stuff. I've realized now I'd like to focus more on entertainment. I want to kind of build an entertainment style show, maybe write some movies and do some different things here and there. But another thing that's happened is, again, there are certain things that going through a program like PhD helps you learn, but really now you can get any book online, even like the academic works that William Lane Craig does that are $85. You can still get those online. So there's just a never-ending library of information to learn from.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. And that's the thing I thought about too, because I said, and I like school too, but I was thinking if I went to school for this, it'd probably force me to read stuff and all I kind of just didn't want to read and stuff. But I said, you still have access to all these books and all these articles and stuff like that. So there was like the years where I was doing a lot of debating. I was just doing nothing but consuming, debating. And that was before I had kids and stuff too, so it was a lot easier, But consuming, debating, But that's what I was thinking. I was like, I can spend all of my reading time reading the stuff that I really want to kind of like really internalize too, So I think that it was kind of a blessing in disguise that I was able to just kind of like do so much debates and stuff like that. It helped really give me a good foundation on epistemology and understanding how to think through stuff too, and also knowing in advance the kind of cliche kind of objections. And because of that, I intentionally craft my videos where I either defeat those objections in advance or set it up where it's clear that I'm not arguing about their standard kind of cliche objections. And so that's why I think it just, so anyways, it worked out, in other words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something else. And I wanted to talk about, and so for me personally, I'm much more of a visual learner, right? If I can watch a video, I can almost get it word for word, remembering it. But if I read a book, it's much harder for me to retain it. Um, One thing I've noticed, because I watch a lot of Christian lectures and atheist lectures. You know, I'm a big fan of guys like Michael Shermer, and Sam Harris, and it's funny if you watch a Christian say he's just giving a presentation, right? And he brings up, okay, here's atheist objection number 1, 2, and 3, and here's how you respond to them. They're either very on point, very accurate, or even maybe stronger than the atheist himself would make. If you watch an atheist give a presentation and he's responding to Christian objections, you sit there and you're like, well, hold on, you're attacking straw man arguments. Like it seemed, and if other atheists are only watching those guys, like the popular level guys, they think, oh, that's what the Christians believe. They're so silly. How could they believe such silly things? And so they're kind of taking the popular atheist word for what we believe. And of course, that's silly.
Yeah, no. What's painful for me to watch, I think sometimes, is like a lot of people like, and this is my perspective. So if other people disagree, you could be right. I won't buckle down too hard on this, but I'd say most of the time the Christian has the logic on their side because they've invested a lot into apologetics and thinking and philosophy and all this stuff. But the atheist a lot of the time is just rhetoric. You know what I mean? And you mentioned Michael Shermer, and I remember I think you said back in the day too you like Michael Shermer a lot. I think that his arguments are so painfully bad, like they're so bad. It's like painful almost. Like
He's so lovable though. He's such a nice guy. I
do like the guy's likable. I like him too. I like him. But I think there's other atheists that are just way better, man. Way better. You know what I mean? And
fair enough. I think Sam Harris is probably I think some of his arguments are bad. I think he's very articulate and very smart though.
Yeah. I like listening to Harris too. His objections get sloppier and sloppier as he has to get into details about like religions and stuff like that. He gets sloppier, like Christianity is sloppy. But I do like Harris. And so I only watch non-Christian channels. I don't really watch hardly very many Christian channels because I'm always trying to hear what they're saying and I want to think it through myself. And I like to be challenged. I want to be challenged so I can understand what I believe more and more. So every time I'm challenged, it just, helps me articulate, and then I'll change my views if I need to. I'll say, okay, if I hold this view, well, that implies that I can't hold this other view. So I'm going to have to figure out which view makes more sense or whatever, if I have to get rid of a view or whatever, or if I'm launching this criticism at this religion or this belief system, and if the same thing were applied to my beliefs, then I either have to, then it makes me feel like I have to change my, whatever it is that my procedure or my way of thinking, my epistemology really, when it comes to beliefs. And so that's really helped me kind of sharpen my beliefs. But back to what you said, yeah, I think a lot of, that's my view, is that most of the time the atheist arguments are really bad, but like because they're emotional and rhetorical, the audience isn't, and the thing is the audience isn't able to pick up on what's going on because they're not familiar with all these details that people like us just spend all their time studying, right? If they don't know what's going on, they're going to try to shift to the person that sounds more confident, competent, and rhetorically strong, because that sounds like psychological power rather than even if the content is good or not.
Mm-hmm. I just got, you said his name was Phil. Philip, you're submitting all the questions.
JMD?
JMD.
Oh, yeah, that's John. His name's John. His name's John. John.
Oh, how did I hear Phil? I don't know where.
No, dude.
He said, so what is your video preparation procedure?
Yeah, so what I'll basically do is I'll have an idea. I let it kind of marinate in my mind for a few days. Just kind of like while I'm working at work or thinking in the shower, whatever, I'll kind of let it marinate, and then I'll come to kind of what my main points I want to get out are. And then when it comes time to kind of like really sit down and kind of write it out, I just flesh out like an outline of what I'm going to do. And sometimes I try to, if it's something that I need to be really careful in my wording, I'll write it out word for word. But I don't have a teleprompter. So I'll just try to kind of memorize, whatever and record. So, but that's basically how I kind of do it. So I do write out a little bit of an outline, or in some cases I'll write out like a script, but that I'll loosely hold to though. I always change whenever I'm recording. I'll feel, if this isn't flowing right or something. So I'll always kind of change it. But that's basically what I do to prepare. And if I need to do more research and read up on stuff, then I will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very similar to what I try to do. I actually try to, and I don't always do this. Sometimes I'll have an idea and I don't actually know what exactly it is I want to say. So maybe I'll just pick this idea, I'll put the camera on, and then I'll just kind of start talking, try to explore it. I've done that with some of my, videos on the moral argument. Otherwise, I actually try to write it out like an essay. Like I'm trying to write a really coherent essay that I want to say convince an atheist professor with. And that it helps because it forces you to organize your thoughts. And like even in the case we were just talking about, I didn't know how big a deal the Trinity, how central the concept of the Trinity was going to be in my argument. And so now I get to the end of writing it and I have to go back and do all the stuff. So writing it out, I think is a really, really important step.
Oh, absolutely. And another thing I do too, if it's something that's like this, the slavery thing that I'm doing right now, the series, I watched every video that I could find arguing in support of cosmic skeptics' view is that the Bible supports slavery. So I watched every video I could find on atheists talking about this topic. And then I watched a few of the ones from people who are Christians and stuff like that. And I noticed that they really only have like 2 verses that they use to try to show that the Bible supports slavery. And then that's when I realized, I said, if this is the best they have, these verses are like light. I mean, they need these to freaking survive. You know what I mean? This is like their life jacket and boat. You know what I mean? Like without this, the entire thing just flunks. And I thought it was so bizarre, given all of the scriptures in the Bible. You know what I mean? And to just kind of argue from just these 2 scriptures as if it creates an entire doctrine that says, hey, God's saying, yeah, slavery's awesome, just do it. You know what I mean? Like it's bizarre. So
yeah, it's one of those things. Like I feel like if you're just say the average lay atheist and you read the Bible, you can come away thinking it supports slavery. But for me, anybody who's like well read or put themselves in the public sphere who like actually goes out and speaks on this, it's like how do you have any excuse if you're supposed to be well read on this and thinking that the Bible supports the kind of slavery that was in America? And it's funny. There's a audio clip. It's on YouTube of J. Warner Wallace, and it's like 10 minutes, and he's just going scripture, 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 scripture. Don't abuse your slaves. You have to treat them well. All this stuff. And I thought your video in particular was, I think it was part 2, that actually there was something I hadn't even seen before reading the scriptures, that when you addressed one of the verses where it talks about if you beat a slave and he dies, you're punished. And then what is it? If he recovers after 2 days?
Yeah. If he gets up after 2 days, this is Exodus 21. 21. I can't remember the exact verse right now, but yeah, Exodus 21. And yeah, that's what it says. But and so this is what I found in doing this series. See, because I actually this series I did more reading on than I typically do, because I just want to make sure that there's not anything I'm missing, And also, there's not a terrible amount written on this topic either, because I thought there was going to be a lot more. But a lot of the stuff too I read, I was like, I was like, well, yeah, this could, some things I didn't agree with, and I said some things could be argued better, and so I really wanted to think it through myself too. So, anyways, I spent a lot of time going through the Hebrew, reading a whole lot of Hebrew, reading all the verses that have the Toshav and the Gar, all the verses too in the scriptures about them too, and all this stuff. But anyways, wait, I'm sorry, I think I got off topic. What was your question again?
Okay, so the way I had always interpreted that scripture was it was basically talking about the mens rea. It was basically talking about, like, in a court of law, you have to show intent behind a certain crime. And so the way I read it was, well, if he dies immediately, the person who beat his slave clearly had intent to kill him, and so he should be punished. But if he recovers, there's not the same mens rea, not the same intent in he was aiming for this guy's death. I think you even more brilliantly pointed out that what they're specifically talking about is the kind of punishment for the crime. So if you kill him, you get killed. That's the punishment. But if you don't kill him, then the punishment is different. But they kind of read it and say, well, he's not getting punished at all. It's okay to just beat your slaves.
That's right. No, that and you're right on that too. Most scholars will talk about that too. Is about the judges and stuff. And there's a lot of case law too. And in this new video that I just did today, I talk a lot more about the laws and stuff to try to get more context so people can understand what's going on. The only thing I'm worried about is I may have talked too much, and I hope it's not boring. So I'll have to see if I have to trim some out or whatever. But I try to give a lot of context about the law so people can understand, because this topic is more complex than I think both sides, to me, when I read it, try to lead it on to be, because in this time there's a lot of different kinds of slavery. And so that's like so important to know, because it's not just this, cookie cutter one version of slavery. And the skeptics will always say, oh yeah, it was awful slavery. And the Christians will often say it was all indentured servitude. But it's a little bit more complex than that, you know what I mean? Because there was, given the time of ancient Near East and stuff like that too. So the type of slaveries that we're trying to see what was going on is in the scriptures. And in order to do that, you want to take in context the full of the scriptures. And so what I realized in doing the verse 2 is that, or doing the video, was that a lot of the skeptics on all the verses that they quote, they read in their preconceived notions of how modern slavery is into the passage, because it doesn't read out of the scriptures. You only read it into the scriptures. So like in Exodus, just that scripture we're talking about, they say, oh, God's saying that if you beat them, they get up after 2 days, then you get away scot-free. But that's not right, and that's why I talked about the verses following. It talks about the, the tooth and the eye, and the slave can go free. And the tooth and the eye are just idioms too for like physical abuse, So, but anyways, that's the thing too. They read that into it with the sex slaves in the video I just did today. They read into here God saying, hey, rape these women, have sex with them as you wish, and dispose of them as you please. That's so obviously not what's going on if you read the entire context, because he quotes from Numbers 31. But if you even start at Numbers 25, you start understanding why the virgins were singled out. And it had nothing to do with them being your sexual slaves or anything like that. Instead, it had to do with like the ritual sex. And then he reads in racism. You watch my video for more on that too, because I don't want to go on about it. But then too, he reads racism into Leviticus 25, where God is talking about, or he says you can buy and sell slaves from foreign nations, and from the nations around you is what the verse was that he quotes, the nations around you. But how is this racist? Like if you're saying any nation around you, you can take slaves from, it's not singling out people based on their race, and on top of that too, like we have a gazillion scriptures, and that's the thing too, for it to be racism, it would have to be focused on their race. But every time, and he's just like, well, God told Moses to kill the Midianites, and then and he's like, so that's racist too. But he doesn't realize that was based on the behavior of the Midianites, given the context of Numbers 25 and on, at least Numbers 25 and on. You know what I mean? It was based on behavior, which is why if the Hebrew men committed the same crimes, they would also be killed. You know what I mean? So, and that's the thing, if they engaged in the ritual sex with the Midianite women or whatever, they would get killed too. So it was clearly based on behavior, but not race. But like, I realized all of the verses that they quote, they read all of these assumptions into the verses rather than reading them out of the verse. And it's because they have a preconceived notion of what slavery was in America, during the slave trade, as opposed to how the people in the culture would have understood it and what was going on in that culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really important. It's one thing Frank Turk always talks about, which is, people get mad because God commands the extinction. We'll use that word because it's like the hyperbolic word that was used, but that's not even necessarily scriptural. But people get mad when it talks about God commanding you to go wipe out the Canaanites, but they were murdering their babies.
Right.
And like you were saying, with the idea of it being race-based, or the kind of slavery we had in America, and you even quoted this verse. I don't remember exactly which verse it is, but there's actually several of them in your video. God actually talks about, because this was after they had been led out of the land of Egypt. That was the kind of slavery we had in America, was the Egyptians oppressing the Israelites. And after they're let out, God specifically says, don't abuse foreigners or mistreat foreigners. Welcome them into your tribe. Show them how to become part of your tribe. Don't abuse them, because you know what it was like to be abused in Egypt.
That's right. Yeah, and there's countless verses like that too, where that's why for him to say that the Bible's tribalistic is just ridiculously naive. In any of the freaking books that he quotes from, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Exodus, there's like countless scriptures in there saying to love the foreigner, love them as you love yourself, treat them well, take care of them. If a slave runs away, don't send him back to his harsh master, but keep him there, keep him safe, and let him live wherever he wants to live. I mean, there's countless things like that. So to say that the Bible's tribalistic is just ridiculously flawed. So yeah, and I don't expect for the new video to get as many views because it always, whenever you do a series, it's going to start. People watch the first one, they always drop off for every one, no matter what. But this video, I think, really just puts the nail in the coffin to a lot of his views. And I've said this, and I'll continue to say it until I'm proven wrong. I don't think Cosmic Skeptic is intentionally being dishonest. I think he's just being lazy. You know what I mean? And that's the thing too, is when people say people are dishonest, a lot of the times they're probably trying to think of something to win the debate or win their position or whatever. And so you can't say that they're dishonest because they're just trying to think of a way out of it. Or they're just being lazy a lot of the time. They just don't know what you know, or they haven't looked into it as deep as you have, But I think Cosmic Skeptic, was just pretty lazy in this video. And I think he just most likely he got his verses from other online atheists because they all use the same verses. So if he didn't do that, he did a Google search because there's no way that he read these verses in their complete context and in the story, in order to try to argue very strongly about them.
Yeah, I never like to argue intent against an opponent or say they're being dishonest. Or I always just assume maybe they're just wrong, And especially with a guy like Cosmic Skeptic, I feel like he's being specifically honest. I mean, if you look at some of his positions, like other atheists would always talk about, well, I'm a naturalist, but I believe in free will, or I'm a naturalist, but I also believe that there's morality. And there's a contradiction there. Cosmic Skeptic actually seems to be doing the opposite, which is, well, I'm an atheist, so he agrees that there is no free will, or I'm an atheist, so I do believe morality is subjective. So I do believe he's being honest about the thing. I just think he's wrong.
Yeah, and I think he's inconsistent a lot, but he's also a young kid and he's growing too, and he's learning more in philosophy. I actually enjoy his channel. I watch his channel. I watch Dillahanty's channel. I watch Jacqueline Glenn's channel. I watch a lot of these people's channels. And Cosmic Skeptic's so freaking likable too. That's why his people were all just like, I mean, he just sent a little passive tweet about my video and sent floods of people to my channel saying, you know what I mean? And hitting dislike, downvote and everything and just leaving a nasty comment, So people like the kid, you know what I mean? But just so they know, it's going to take a lot more than that to try to slow me down. It's not going to work. I don't get bullied into silence. I never will. So, but anyways, I like the kid, you know what I mean? And I think that he did think that the Bible, or the slavery in the Bible, was like, how it was, because he believed whoever he heard that from. And because of that, he had this sort of righteous anger, you know what I mean? And I can understand that, if he was right, but he's just really wrong and was really lazy in his execution of it. So
yeah, the thing about slavery too, even if you just look at it kind of from a pragmatic point of view, like people like to get mad and say, well, when we did have slavery in America, look at how all the Christians they pointed to the Bible to justify it. And it's like, well, okay, take that off the table for a minute, right? Here's one thing that's important to recognize. America did not invent slavery. If you look at every single culture in the world has practiced slavery. And a lot of the slaves we got from Africa were already enslaved under their own people, and we traded for a lot of them. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it okay, but that's just the reality of it. We were the first, right? You look at this, we were founded on Judeo-Christian principles, and that ethic manifested itself. And so we were the first to kind of, from that Christian worldview, say, wait a minute, these are people just like everybody else. They deserve equal rights. We fought a bloody war to end it. So even if you just fast forward to today, look what's been the result of the Judeo-Christian worldview. We were the first culture to free slaves and kill each other over it.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And that's one thing I wish I could have got into more, or even the New Testament stuff too, because the arguments against the New Testament supported slavery are just worse. I think they're way worse. So I wish I could have got into that. So, but I won't. But what I am going to do is do a live stream with Adam Coleman. He's one of my homeboys for a while too, and he's done a lot of work too on the slavery stuff too. And I might get Parr on there too, the guy that the video he's responding to. I might reach out to him, see if he wants to get on the live stream too. But anyways, in the live stream, what I want to do is respond to like the main objections I got to all the videos, and what I thought were the best objections to all the videos too. because I think that will help. There was so much that I could have said that I just didn't have the time to say too. So hopefully this gives me an opportunity to get out some of the other stuff I wanted to say.
Yeah. Yeah, to answer JMD Apologetics 101's two questions for me, no, I did not go to the Cross Exam Instructors Academy. I would like to do that in the future when I can hopefully I can get to a point in the future where I do this full time, and maybe I'll have some extra money, because you can actually get online degrees from them, which is really cool. But to answer your second question, yes, I would love to do an interview on your channel. Message me either through YouTube. I'm pretty sure you can do that. You can add each other on YouTube, or leave a comment on my other videos. We'll try to get in touch.
Yeah, on YouTube you can't anymore. They took it away.
Okay, never mind. Well, I'm always hesitant to put my actual email in the comment section on YouTube. You know what? My name is Stelman Smith Jr. Follow me on Twitter. I'll follow you back, and then we can direct message each other to set that up.
And my boy Sean's in the house too. Sean, what up, man? Believe in Thinkers. Sean's one of my Patreons. Cool guy. Yeah, cool kid. Good to see you here, man.
Nice. And Deck Crash, how do I say that?
Deck Crash.
Deck Crash. He says, "What do you mean? Seeing how you're going to be making a video about Matt Dillahunty's debate with Mike Winger." Yeah, you did post about that earlier. He said, "Would you agree that Dillahunty always goes after low-hanging fruit?" That's what I get.
No, I don't. I think I disagree. Dillahunty tried to debate William Lane Craig. William Lane Craig turned him down, I think, because Craig said he's had bad experiences debating people about degrees and stuff. I mean, people that aren't academics, which is why he was hesitant to debate Christopher Hitchens and stuff like that. But Dillahunty's he's a pretty seasoned debater. He has a system set up, and this is what I want to talk about in the video. He's created this structure that makes it so that way there could be no evidence for God. He really does, and I know he'll disagree with that, but I'll clarify that when I do the video. I just haven't got around to do it, and it came out so much in Mike Winger's video, but I've been watching Dillahunty's videos for a long time too. I know how he thinks, and I know people that think like him too. And I tend to like Dillahunty's channel too, and it's kind of awkward how much I agree with Dillahunty on. But his setup, I think, is just like ridiculously rigged. You know what I mean? And so I'll kind of explain the structure and how he kind of gets around, trying to have to take a position and stuff like this. And then he tries to make it where it's based on his personal psychology, so he can just hand wave everything away. So I just think it's completely like rigged. But I do like Dillahunty, and I like his channel.
Right on. Yeah. So I guess to finish off the live stream, because we got a little bit into the resurrection, but it was more conversational than providing evidence for it, which fair enough. But since tomorrow's Easter, I have two specific books I'd like to recommend if you're interested on reading up on the resurrection, if you haven't already, and then I'll let you recommend the books you think. My favorite is Cold Case Christianity from J. Warner Wallace, just because the perspective he brings to the table, I just think is so unique from how apologists traditionally approach this topic. And then the second, I would definitely say it's one of the best books out there, and it's one, I don't want to say the oldest, but it's been out for a while. Reasonable Faith by William Lane Craig. And at the end, when he gets into resurrection, I think it's just brilliant.
No, absolutely. I like both those books. They're both really good too. The book for me that was a very good starting book. I guess not starting too much. I don't know. I guess if you want kind of an overview from an angle that's as unbiased as possible, I'd say Mike Licona's big book on the resurrection, called "Resurrection of the Resurrection of Jesus," by Mike Licona. I enjoyed that book a lot because I felt like I was getting a really good fair treatment of all of the evidence from the I can't remember how he narrowed it down, but all of the evidence within some bracket of some sort. For Jesus and the resurrection too, and he tried, and I think he was overly charitable on a lot too, but which is good. So you can understand too, like how strong some of the points are compared to others too. So I really enjoyed that book. Outside of that, nothing else directly comes to mind. But I do like Cold Case Christianity. That's one I'd recommend as well. So
there's The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't think I've ever even read Case for Christ straight through. I've read parts of it, I know, but I don't think I've read it straight through.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many books I have that I haven't actually read all the way through.
Yeah,
It's difficult because I'll be like reading 3 at a time, and then I'll pick up a fourth, and then I just ignore the other 3, and I get really into that one. And like I said, I don't learn super well that way.
Yeah, which is fine too. And Sean in Believe in Thinkers just said, he brought up a point too that I think is good. He says, yes, Mike really dives into how to work with your horizons, which I think is another awesome part about his book, because he spends like the first few chapters like talking about how history is done, history when it comes to epistemology. And also he talks about like how all of our biases influence the facts about the resurrection, and then ways to limit those biases by having some sort of objective structure. And he also talks about like postmodernism in history, and how it's applied to history and stuff like this. All of these things really strengthen your thinking in general. So that's why I kind of recommend the book as well for that. I'm not really sure. I can't think right now if it's really technical or not. I can't remember because it's been a long time since I've read it. So I don't know if I could recommend it to, new people or not. But yeah, so get it if you can. And it's huge. But I remember I read it in about 4 days, but I was reading a lot. And I read all the footnotes too, because he's got these huge parts of footnotes too. But it's worth it if you can. So
yeah, and also as a free resource, go on YouTube and type in J. Warner Wallace. Just his lectures are brilliant. I mean, he's such a phenomenal physical, or what would you call it, visual presenter. His PowerPoints just create, you can start to visualize what he's talking about in your head. There's one specific slide I have in mind that he does really well, which is he presents all the theories, right, to explain the facts surrounding Jesus. And then he kind of has it along dirt paths, and then there's all these signs which are barriers in the way. And he talks about all the natural explanations. They have all these barriers in the way, like the conspiracy theory, why it doesn't work. Here's 3 barriers in that way to that explanation. And when you get to the explanation of the resurrection, the only barrier that's in the way is an anti-supernatural bias. Mm-hmm. And so I think that one's called The Cold Case for the Resurrection. But I would even, just go on YouTube and just look up J. Warner Wallace's, all his clips. He did a video on my channel. We talked a lot about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, J. Warner's a guy, man, I always want to read more of too, because I like the guy's work too. It's better than you think on the surface. Like I remember when I first came across his stuff, I was thinking, man, I don't know if this is really scholarly or you know what I mean, or really, but his arguments are good. So.
Yeah, it's ingenious how he draws. I'm so interested in like court cases and cold cases now. I watch more of those shows. He got me so interested in it. And it's funny, when you present it from that perspective, you think, well, look, if we're willing to convict somebody and put them away for 30 years of life based on this kind of evidence, we should trust that evidence when we're using it over here too with the resurrection.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good, man. I got his kids book for my son, which once he gets a little bit older, we'll start digging into it. So I'm waiting. So.
Right on. Well, listen, we're gonna get going here. I thank you so much for being here, for being part of my first live stream. I really appreciate you taking the time. YouTube channel and the Twitter are both What Do You Meme? So if you happen to be here not from his channel, odds are you are. Let's be honest. I don't have that much of a fan base here. But if you have not subscribed to his channel, please go do that. Follow him on Twitter. Jon McCray, thank you so much for being here, sir, and I hope we can do it again soon.
No, man, no. I'm happy to be here, man. And this has been a long time coming for us too, so I'm happy to be able to be on and chat with you, man. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And tomorrow's Easter, and Jesus did rise from the dead. Stop broadcasting. This is awkward.